About a dozen years ago, maybe exactly 13 it would be, I launched a very particular program here at the festival, which is about young composers. Having been at one time a young composer, I know all of the daunting aspects of being such a person, which is very different from playing an instrument. When you play an instrument, it's pretty clear how you progress in your studies and in your profession. A young composer uh, faces different issues. They are unable to actually hear what they're doing unless somebody plays it for them. And the result of that is that as a young composer, you're basically writing most of your first pieces for amateurs, students. The people that play your pieces are the other students wherever you're studying. And that leads to a certain dilemma, which is if you write something and these people are playing it and it doesn't sound good, whose fault is it? Is it what you've written? Or is it the fact that it's simply students playing your piece? And if professionals played it, it would be fine. So I had seen different programs, particularly there was a program that the Minnesota Orchestra still does, where they select, I believe it's three, it might be more, maybe five young composers, and they organize a rehearsal of the orchestra in which the pieces, short pieces that these young people write, are read, sight read, basically. A little bit of rehearsing, not much, but they get a sense of what a professional orchestra playing their music sounds like. I wanted to find a way to install a program here which was beneficial in that same way. And what I came down to was the single most difficult thing for young, middle aged, and old composers to write, and that is a string quartet. String quartets are daunting for several reasons. First of all, you have four people with four left hands who can play at best two notes each. So you have maximum eight notes that can be played at the same time, which is very limiting in terms of harmonic structure. And the other aspect, which is difficult, is that you don't have the colors. In an orchestra, you have an infinite number of combinations which bring about many, many different colors, depending on obviously your skill. But someone like a Ravel or Bartok can elicit these incredible mixtures of sounds from the orchestra. That doesn't exist with a string quartet. You have four string players making that particular sound. So this is a really difficult thing to do, very challenging, but it also forces you to come to the essence of what your music is, because it comes down to this kind of skeletal rendition of your musical thoughts. And that's a great challenge. So I decided that we should do a program for young composers involving string quartet writing. And what we came up with is a week project. We have used two string quartets up until now. The first one was the Flux Quartet, specializing in new music. And we recently have switched to the Jack Quartet, also specialists in new music. Uh, Both of them are very accustomed to learning very quickly, reading very quickly, and working with composers. So the task that we set for the composers was to write a short string quartet, short being 6 to 8 minutes. They arrive here on a Sunday. On Monday morning, they get 2 hours rehearsal time with the quartet. And I sit in those sessions not to teach them how to compose, not to help them with the pieces that they've written, although if asked, I will comment. But I'm there more as a kind of translator. These are young composers who have worked mostly with students and don't really have the experience of working with professionals and knowing how to talk to them. It's quite simply that. There is a way, it's very much similar to being a conductor. A great conductor in a rehearsal knows how to use the fewest number of words, the most concise way of telling the orchestra what they wish them to do in a way that elicits a reaction exactly that the conductor wants. It's very similar for composers. In rehearsal, it's very important to know how to speak to a musician so that what results from your telling them something is exactly what you want it to be. There are words that are very useful. I'll give you an example. What's not useful is to use analogies. This should sound like clouds floating across the sky with the sun shining through. That's useless to a musician. They want to know faster, slower, louder, softer, and more intricate degrees of that kind of explanation. Could you please play this on the string or off the string with your bow? Can you play more towards the frog of the bow or more towards the tip of the bow? Things that are technically helpful, but which will result in exactly what you want them to be doing. So that's what I help with. I help them translate what they want to say into a way of speaking to professionals. So the Monday morning, they have 2 hours of rehearsal. Tuesday is a day off for them to make revisions, change little things in their pieces. Wednesday, another 2 hours. Thursday, another hour. Friday, a dress rehearsal, a concert which is recorded. And throughout this process, the quartet is part of the experience. They are accustomed to working with composers. They are accustomed to situations where the composer will say something like, I want it to sound such and such, but I'm not sure if I wrote it properly. Is there a better way that I could achieve what I'm after? And both the Flux Quartet and the Jack are very experienced in helping in those kinds of situations. And so it becomes very much a collaborative week, which is definitely way beyond the experience that these young people would have had. It's totally professional. They can be assured that if something doesn't sound right, it's their fault. but they can also be assured that they will get help from the players in how to make it be better, how they can write something a little bit differently and have it come out the way they intended, as opposed to when they hear something and they think, oh, no, 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 I didn't want it to sound like that. Along the way during this week, I spend one afternoon, I believe it's the Tuesday afternoon, but I'm not sure anymore, and I put them in my car and we drive out into the land. And I basically give them a kind of history, archaeology, anthropology lecture about where they are. Because just coming to Santa Fe and being in town doesn't give you that. And I love doing that. It's my favorite place on earth, and I know it quite intimately. And I take them to see local art. I take them to old Pueblo sites. I take them to old Hispanic villages. And by the end of the day, they have a real insight and a real sense of where they are and the history and the depth of spirituality which is here. In the end, it's an experience unlike anything else. And the feedback that comes from this has always been more or less the same, and that is a great sense of being respected. In most places, in schools, composers are a little bit different neighborhood. They don't always have a lot to do with the instrumentalists. And even at professional places, festivals that I won't mention, they feel a little bit ostracized. And here they're treated with exactly the kind of respect that we treat any visiting composer. And it's an experience which really elevates their self-esteem and their sense of being in this music world, which sometimes is not there. How are they chosen? This is very interesting. I did not want a competition. I did not want a prize. I did not want hundreds of scores being submitted to select people from. And I wanted it much more to be something along the lines of a couple of major prizes, like I'm thinking of the Gilmore Piano Prize, which is given anonymously. People follow pianists anonymously for years and then select someone. MacArthur Award, same kind of thing where you don't know and it just comes out of the blue. And so I have always chosen by myself who the composers are. The first year we had 3, which I found to be a bit too many. And so subsequently, every year we have 2 composers. My sense of the target area for them would be under 30, but beyond primary music education. So doctoral students or postdoctoral students just emerging into the professional world, kind of that age group. And I find them in various ways, either speaking to some of the teachers because they're colleagues of mine. So I will speak to composition teachers in the major places where someone would go to study, Yale, Indiana, Juilliard, Curtis, that kind of thing. And then in this day and age, all young composers have websites. And so it's quite easy once I get a few leads to listen to pieces by various young composers, and then I choose the two. In the years since we've started, which is now, this will be the 13th year, it has become known amongst that age group and that particular group of young composers that there is this thing. We actually had, for the very first time, a couple of months ago, a young composer wrote to the festival saying, "How can I apply for the Young Composers Program?" And they received an answer from somebody in the office telling them, "Sorry, you cannot." And I like it that way. I would hope that it remains that way. But that brings me also to the question of, what are my criteria? How do I listen to young composers? What am I looking for? What is it that I judge to be worthy of being given this opportunity? And of course, as with everything in the festival, it boils down to my own personal taste, because there's really no other way to do it. And my taste in composing goes really back to quite fundamental issues. I am a strong believer that what has made this music durable for centuries is exactly what should keep making it durable into the future. And those are very specific and very particular aspects of music. First of all, structure. I need to sense that a piece has some kind of flow that makes logical sense to me, that I have a feeling about where I am in the piece and where it's going, and I don't feel lost. Feeling lost is a structural problem. Secondly, there are fundamental aspects of this music which I believe need to be part of pieces: harmony, melody, rhythm. Every composer has strengths in various aspects of this. There are, of course, composers who have all of it. There are composers who lack certain aspects. For instance, there are many composers who have a difficult time writing fast music. They may write beautiful slow music, but fast is a different animal, and it's difficult for some people. For me, for instance, I've never had an easy time writing fast music. I need to work very hard at it, and I understand what makes it sound fast, but that's an aspect. In the end, the single most important factor that makes a great composer versus a not great composer is one very simple but very fundamental thing, and that is personality. Communicating through the language of music brings one to a kind of idiomatic expression which is tied completely to the personality of the person writing the music. If you hear 20 seconds of Brahms, it's recognizable as Brahms. If you hear 20 seconds of Mozart, it's recognizable as Mozart. And the strength of a musical personality is what endures more than anything else, even flaws. For instance, Schumann, to me, one of the great musical personalities ever, but many of the pieces are terribly flawed. Uh, he had particular idiosyncratic issues, for instance, with certain rhythms. He would get fixated on a certain rhythm, a dotted rhythm, and go off on a tangent forever using that rhythm, and you get stuck in pieces. Uh, there are varying degrees of greatness in the pieces, but the personality is so unique, the sound is so unique that it endures. So when I'm listening to these young composers, and clearly they are finding themselves. So this is not a 50-year-old person who has zeroed in and focused on their voice, but a young person looking for their voice. I try and try and listen for personality, for a voice that's not like what all of the other students are doing, but somewhat unique. Uh, it's a real guessing game, and it's something that takes a lot of intuition on my part, but I've become pretty good at guessing which ones are going to develop. And we've done very well over these 13 years with quite a few of the young composers maturing, finding themselves in the profession, and becoming quite successful. As an adjunct to that, I will add that there's another aspect which I've begun to bring into this, and that is something, again, idiosyncratic to composers as opposed to players. If you're a pianist and you go perform with the Philadelphia Orchestra and you play very well and everybody loves it, they invite you back. Not once, not twice, but over and over. As a composer, if you're commissioned to write a piece for an orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, let's say, it doesn't matter how good the piece is. That's it. There is not a kind of natural coming back to the people the way they do with instrumentalists. I understand this because there are a finite number of pieces you can commission each year, and you want to spread them around and you want different voices, but it's a little bit disappointing when you do something well and there's no follow-up. So I have started now to commission these young composers some years later. The ones that start to do well, we give them a bigger commission 3 or 4 years after they've been a young composer, just to reinforce the sense that there is some continuity, that if you do well, people want you to do it again. So we have had for the past, I'd say, 4 years, in addition to the two young composers, kind of not anymore that young composer, but coming from that program, receiving a bigger commission and having a kind of continuity.